In every small town, there's a story people whisper but never write down, a tale too disturbing for folklore, too sacred for skepticism. In the case of Briar Hill, that story begins not with a scream or a crime, but with a prayer spoken in Latin, alone, in the middle of the night, beneath the floorboards of an old stone chapel. They say Father Elwood was a man of deep faith, but faith, like fire, can both illuminate and consume. He arrived in Briar Hill in the winter of 1894. The town was blanketed in snow, its people weary from loss. Their previous priest had died under unclear circumstances, heart failure. The official story went, but there were murmurs. Quiet, careful ones. Some said he'd grown strange in the weeks before his death. Others claimed he had spoken in tongues during Mass. One man said he'd heard singing, low, mournful chanting, long after midnight, coming from beneath the chapel floor. When Father Elwood came, he brought no luggage, just a leather satchel and a single heavy trunk. He moved into the rectory without fanfare, quietly assuming his role. He was young, unusually so for a priest of the time, thin, pale, with sharp eyes and a voice that seemed too calm for someone who had seen war, which some said he had. His sermons were captivating, not joyful, but powerful, like a warning wrapped in scripture. He spoke of temptation not as a force to be resisted, but as a force to be understood. He told stories from the Old Testament that others had long ignored, focusing on sacrifice, on suffering, on divine silence. And though his words were unsettling, the pews were always full. Still, strange things began to happen. Candles that had been extinguished would flicker to life again. The bells would toll without wind or hand. Children refused to step inside the chapel, claiming it was too cold, even in spring. And always there was that smell, faint, like old stone and incense, mixed with something metallic, something that made the nose wrinkle and the mind uneasy. But no one questioned Father Elwood. He was, after all, the one who stayed behind to bless the dead during the fever outbreak of '96, the one who buried the cholera victims himself, reading each name as he stood alone over their mass grave, the one who never asked for coin, only obedience. It wasn't until 1901 that anyone suspected how far things had gone. That year, a carpenter named Mullen was hired to repair part of the chapel's rotting floor. As he pulled up warped boards near the altar, he uncovered a door, a hatch sealed with iron nails and etched with strange symbols. It hadn't been listed on any original floor plans. When he asked Father Elwood about it, the priest stared for a long moment before replying. "There is no door," he said, "only judgment." The next morning the hatch was gone, replaced, repaired, vanished. Mullen was paid double his fee and told never to speak of it again, but he did speak. To his wife, to the barkeep, to the town clerk, who wrote it down in his ledger as an odd tale from a tired man. Within a week, Mullen disappeared. The official story was that he'd taken a job in Boston. But his tools were still in the chapel. His horse was still in the stable. His wife never heard from him again. By spring, the town began to change. People whispered of dreams, identical ones, filled with stone walls and flickering candles, of chanting heard near the chapel at impossible hours, of Father Elwood, seen standing motionless in the cemetery, mouthing words to gravestones, but no one left, no one dared, because they feared him, or because something else had taken root beneath that chapel. It wouldn't be until years later, decades in fact, that a hidden compartment would be discovered in the rectory, and inside, wrapped in waxed cloth and twine, were the diaries of Father Elwood. But that is a chapter for another time. Right now, we're only at the beginning. The chapel still stands in Briar Hill, and some say, if you listen closely at night, you can still hear the prayer, whispered from beneath the floor. It wasn't until long after Father Elwood vanished that anyone discovered the hidden compartment. By 1932, the chapel in Briar Hill had been abandoned for nearly 3 decades. Its windows were boarded shut, its pews blanketed in dust. Ivy clung to its stone walls like a slow, suffocating hand. Local children dared each other to approach it, but few ever crossed the threshold. The doors groaned when pushed, and an unnatural cold met anyone who stepped inside, even in midsummer. That year, the property was purchased by a preservation society from Boston, a group interested in restoring historical landmarks across Massachusetts. The team that arrived was small: a historian, a carpenter, and a young archivist named Lillian Maris. It was Lillian who found the compartment. She was combing through the rectory, cataloging what little had survived: old ledgers, cracked hymnals, a few faded vestments. The place felt still, but not empty. As if the air itself was watching, there was a smell in the back room, musty, sweet, and wrong. Lillian described it later as rotting paper and perfume, soaked in rust. She found the compartment behind a false panel in the study wall. It clicked softly, revealing a shallow alcove no wider than a drawer. Inside was a bundle bound in waxed cloth and black twine, tight and old, like something buried for years. There were scratches on the inside of the compartment, claw marks almost, or writing worn away with panic. Lillian opened the bundle. Within it were 6 small leather-bound volumes, faded, cracked, each numbered in Latin, Unus Duo Tres, each labeled only with a symbol, not a cross, but a jagged, angular design she couldn't recognize. It looked like a distorted key, or a broken eye. The first diary began with a date: March 3rd, 1895, just months after Father Elwood arrived. His handwriting was immaculate, precise, cold, and what it revealed was nothing like the sermons he once gave. The people trust me, they listen as lambs do, but the voice beneath the chapel speaks louder now. It rises through the stones and into my skin. I do not sleep, I do not need to, I am being made ready. At first, Lillian thought it was fiction, the ramblings of a madman or a disturbed priest suffering in isolation. But as she read on, patterns emerged. Names were mentioned, specific families in town, events that matched town records: the cholera outbreak, the fever, the disappearances. But in Father Elwood's version, they weren't accidents, they were offerings. 3 taken this week, 2 with boils, 1 in sleep. Their bodies did not rot. I buried them myself, I was told to. The voice rewards obedience. There were references to something called the door beneath, a term that came up again and again. Sometimes he called it the mouth, sometimes the hollow god, but always in reverence, always in fear. The door beneath the altar must not be opened until the stars return to the black shape, until the music bleeds from stone, until the final mass. The deeper Lillian read, the darker the entries became. He began to describe dreams, not his own, but others. He wrote about visiting people's homes at night without being seen, about reaching through sleep and plucking thoughts like petals from wilted roses. There were diagrams in the later volumes, geometric shapes, circles within circles, each marked with runes or phrases in Latin, Greek, and a third language no one has yet identified. Lillian took photographs, sent pages to linguists. No one could translate them. Some who tried reported headaches. One suffered a seizure during a reading, but it was the 6th volume, the final one, that broke her. The entries in that book were short, scattered, as if written during moments of panic or ecstasy. The chapel breathes now. I felt it beneath my feet. It waits. The choir sings without mouths. They sing in the bones. The earth is thinning. The flesh is only a door. The last entry read, Tonight I will enter the mouth. I have prepared the final hymn. My skin itches from within. I must not scream. Screaming feeds it. Lillian closed the book and wept. She said she didn't know why. Just that she felt grieved, like something had ended long ago and the diary had made her remember. Within weeks, she resigned from the Preservation Society, no formal reason given. But her notes, the ones she left behind, included a single, final line scribbled across the margins of the 6th volume. He wasn't writing madness. He was recording instructions. The diaries were locked away. The society closed the site to the public. The official story was mold contamination, structural instability, another forgotten ruin in a town that never grew. But the compartment is still there, and the diaries. They are missing, gone, vanished from the archive where they were last documented in 1974. Some say they were destroyed, others, that they were taken by someone who understood the diagrams, who wanted to continue the work. The chapel remains sealed, but the air around it is still too cold, and the prayer, the one whispered through floorboards, continues, even when no one is there to speak it. They called them the choir without mouths. It wasn't a term used publicly, not in sermons or parish meetings, but in the back rooms of Briar Hill, whispered between candle-lit kitchen tables, and scribbled on the margins of forgotten letters. It was a phrase people came to fear. It began in 1897, quietly, subtly. Children in the town began waking in the night, crying without reason. Some spoke of music faint, dissonant melodies echoing from the chapel, harmonies no instrument could replicate, chords that hung in the air like cobwebs made of breath. Parents dismissed it at first, nightmares, growing pains, an overactive imagination, but then it spread. Adults began to hear it too low, pulsing hymns beneath the sound of wind, rhythms that made them uneasy, sick even. One woman, Margaret Delaney, described the sensation in a letter to her sister. I hear it at dusk, just as the sun dies, the singing, no words, only this, vibration, as though 1,000 voices hum behind the walls. And yet when I press my ear to the plaster, I hear nothing, but inside my bones. My God, it's deafening. She wasn't alone. Local animals began to avoid the chapel grounds entirely. Birds refused to nest in the trees near the bell tower. Dogs would growl and whimper at the chapel gates, refusing to step closer. Still, no one acted, not publicly, because Father Elwood had an explanation. In a homily delivered that autumn, he addressed the town's unease. He smiled that thin, brittle smile of his and said, when the veil grows thin, the faithful will hear, not with ears but with spirit. The music is not ours to understand, only to accept, for it is the sound of awakening. Most didn't know what he meant. But those who did, those who had read enough or seen too much, fell quiet, because by then it was clear the music wasn't coming from the choir loft. It was coming from below, beneath the floorboards. Behind the stone, in 1898, a young altar boy named Edward Lang vanished after evening prayers. He had been sweeping near the altar, waiting for Father Elwood to return from the crypt. When he didn't come home, his mother went to the rectory in tears. Elwood told her the boy had run off, left a note, he claimed, but no one ever saw the note, and Edward's shoes, muddy and worn, were still neatly placed at the base of the altar. Weeks later, others began to vanish. A widowed parishioner, a schoolteacher, a farmhand who had spoken openly about Elwood's odd behaviors. No bodies, no notes, just empty rooms and the music. Always the music. In his third diary, Father Elwood wrote, "The mouth has learned to sing. It calls to those with weakened faith. The choir grows stronger. They sing through absence. They praise in silence." That phrase, "they sing through absence," became central to his writings. He believed the souls taken beneath the chapel were not dead, but transformed, changed into something eternal, beings of sound, not flesh, spirits that formed a chorus for the entity he called the Hollow God. By 1899, church attendance had declined dramatically. Those who remained were either too afraid to leave or too devoted to question. A handful of families tried to move away, but strange misfortunes plagued their journeys, broken wheels, sudden illness. One man, Elias Granger, attempted to burn the chapel down. His body was found days later, face down in the Ashfield River, hands folded neatly over his chest as if placed there. The fire never touched the chapel, and the music only grew louder. Some said you could hear it humming through the walls of nearby homes, that if you pressed a cup to the floorboards at night, you'd hear them, the voiceless choir, singing wordless praise in a language lost to time. But there was one moment, one horrific night, that cemented the legend forever. April 2nd, 1900. That evening, the entire town gathered in the square to discuss whether to confront Father Elwood. Tensions were high, fear thick, but no one knew what lay beneath the chapel. Only the rumors, the diaries still hidden. Then the bell rang, midnight. 7 chimes, not unusual, except no one had touched the bell rope in years. It had been severed, and still it rang. Every window in town vibrated, dogs howled, children screamed in their sleep, and from the direction of the chapel came a sound that no one who heard it would ever forget, singing. Not human, not beautiful, but layered, thick, dense, like dozens, no, hundreds of mouths trying to sing without lungs or throats. Notes warping and twisting as if forced through a tunnel of blood and stone. It lasted 7 minutes, and when it stopped, something changed. People who had been asleep woke with blood pouring from their ears. Several went blind. One woman fell into a coma and never woke again. No one ever spoke publicly of what happened, but the name, the choir without mouths, spread quietly, as a warning, as a curse. Even now, over a century later, hikers who wander too close to the ruins of the Briar Hill Chapel report strange auditory hallucinations. Echoes, pressure in the skull. Some claim to hear singing when the wind is still. The choir remains. It sings not for the living, but for the thing beneath. And if you ever hear it not in your ears, but in your bones, do not listen. Because once you hear the choir, it never stops, not even when you sleep. They called him the man with no eyes, but that name came much later, long after the sightings, long after the doors of the chapel had been sealed shut, long after Father Elwood had vanished and his diaries had slipped quietly into the hands of those who knew better than to speak of them. The first recorded account came from a child. In 1906, 6 years after the last official Mass was held at Briar Hill Chapel, a young boy named Nathaniel Cross wandered too close to the chapel ruins. He was playing with his sister, chasing her between trees, when he noticed something strange in the distance. A man standing completely still in the shadow of the collapsed belfry, tall, thin, wearing black robes like a priest, except the collar was wrong, twisted, torn, as if it had been clawed at from the inside. Nathaniel described the man in detail to his parents that night, except one detail didn't make sense. His eyes, Nathaniel said, were gone, just skin, no holes, but he still saw me. I could feel it. He told them the man tilted his head as if studying him. Then he raised one long finger to his lips and whispered, "SHHH." Nathaniel screamed. His sister swore she saw nothing, but her hair had turned white at the roots. The family moved away the following month. But they weren't the last. In the years that followed, more sightings emerged scattered across Briar Hill and neighboring towns. Always the same figure, always near the edges of woods, behind fences, across empty streets in the fog. A tall man in black robes, and always no eyes. Some believed he was a ghost. Others thought he was something worse, a sentinel left behind to guard the chapel, or a herald of the thing beneath. But then came the event that turned whispers into fear. The Glenbridge incident. In 1921, 3 teenagers from Glenbridge, a town roughly 10 miles north of Briar Hill, went missing during a camping trip in the Ashmore forest. Their bodies were found days later, scattered miles apart. No signs of animal attack, no weapons, but each of them had one disturbing similarity. Their eyes had been removed, surgically, without a single drop of blood left behind, and carved into a tree near their abandoned campfire. Was a symbol, the same one found in Father Elwood's diary, a jagged key-like mark twisted into an impossible shape, Local police dismissed it as vandalism, blamed a drifter, but residents knew better. 2 days later, a store clerk in Briar Hill swore she saw a man standing at the edge of the chapel ruins. No eyes, no sound, just watching her from the woods until she looked away, and when she looked back, he was gone. These reports continued for decades. One chilling detail always remained the same: he never blinked, because there was nothing to blink. No eyelids, no sockets, just smooth, pale skin stretched over where his eyes should have been. In the 1950s, a journalist named Howard Linklater published a series of articles in an obscure occult magazine compiling these sightings. He believed the man with no eyes was not just a spirit, but a vessel. A human body possessed, he wrote, by the echo of a voice. The choir needed a mouthpiece, but the hollow god required a witness. Linklater disappeared 2 months after the article was printed. His last known location, a motel just 3 miles from Briar Hill. His belongings were found intact, except for one thing: the typewriter ribbon had been pulled out and wrapped around his face, tight, like a blindfold. No fingerprints were found. Over the years, the legend took on new forms. Some said the man with no eyes could only be seen by those marked by the diaries, that if you read even one of Father Elwood's entries aloud, you opened yourself to him. Others believed he wasn't a man at all, but the remains of Elwood himself, that after the 6th diary ended and the final hymn was sung in secret, the priest had become something other, no longer a vessel of faith, but of hunger, a silent observer, a watcher for what lies beneath. Even now, hikers and paranormal researchers who dare to step near the chapel grounds report seeing a dark figure in the distance, just far enough to doubt, just close enough to haunt, always watching, always silent, and if you ever get too close, he lifts his finger to his lips and whispers SHHH, because he isn't there to scream, he's there to listen. And once he's seen you without eyes, you'll begin to hear things that no one else can. Whispers in the walls, breaths beneath your bed, and sometimes in the dark, the sound of robes dragging slowly across the floorboards. Behind you, some books are never meant to be opened, and some are never meant to be written. The 6th diary of Father Elwood was both. Its existence had long been denied even by those who handled the earlier 5 volumes with gloved hands and hushed voices. But the 6th was different. It was hidden, buried beneath floorboards, wrapped in cloth soaked with what appeared to be dried blood and ash, bound not in leather, but in stitched layers of pale, worn skin. Not animal, not artificial, human. Unlike the first 5 diaries, which were written in careful script and detailed theological reflection, the 6th was erratic, disjointed, pages smeared, scratched. Some entries written entirely in symbols, others in Latin, a few in tongues no scholar could identify, but one thing was clear: this was not the work of a sane man, and perhaps not the work of a man at all. The diary was discovered in 1974 by a groundskeeper named Ellis Moore. He'd been hired by the local council to assess whether the chapel ruins could be safely restored, turned into a heritage site. Ellis was a practical man, war veteran, father of 3, never believed in ghosts, even as a child growing up near Briar Hill. But on the 2nd day of his assessment, he heard something, a creak beneath the altar stone, as if something shifted from below. Curious and slightly unnerved, Ellis returned that night with tools. No one knew he had plans to break open the sealed floor. No one saw him again after that. What we know comes from the audio tape found inside his truck, a shaky, low-quality cassette that captured his last moments. Opening it now, smells foul. There's something wrapped beneath the flagstone, cloth, or wait, no, it's moving. No, that's not. Oh God. A thud. A screeching noise like metal grinding against bone. Then, silence. The truck remained parked for 3 days before anyone checked it, and inside, on the passenger seat, sat the 6th diary, closed, waiting, What was inside, unlike the earlier entries that detailed sermons, possessions, and communion rituals twisted into madness, this final volume charted a descent not into darkness, but through it, into something deeper. A recurring phrase is etched in the margins of nearly every page: under the chapel, under the veil, under the skin. Elwood was no longer simply chronicling spiritual corruption. He was documenting transformation. He no longer wrote as a priest, not even as a man. He referred to himself in plural. We see now. We feel the choir's breath within us. We have eaten the veil. And then, more chillingly, the flesh we wear is borrowed. We remember the boy Edward. His shoes fit well. There were no entries dated, only phases of the moon and strange glyphs, but one symbol repeated, often a circle with an open mouth in its center, ringed by 13 teardrops. Occult historians now refer to it as the sigil of the hollow god, a deity perhaps, or something older, a concept made flesh. The ritual toward the final pages of the diary, if they can be called pages at all. The writing grows frantic, almost illegible, as though Elwood, or the thing that had become Elwood, was no longer bound by human thought. But then, a single, lucid passage: we will sing the final hymn when the 13 are gathered, when the mouths are filled with silence, when the chapel breathes again and the veil is torn. Then we shall rise, not above, but below, beneath the roots in the soil of memory. We shall become hunger. Some believe this refers to a ritual not yet completed. Others fear it already was, that Father Elwood succeeded and that the chapel was not a church at all, but a gate. Aftermath since its discovery: the 6th diary has changed hands over a dozen times. Each owner has suffered misfortune. One man vanished after claiming to hear whispers in his chimney. A professor went blind after translating only half a page, and a private collector in London had his home consumed in fire, the diary the only item untouched by the flames. Today, the location of the diary is unknown. Some say it was reburied beneath Briar Hill. Others claim it is held in a secret Vatican archive, locked behind walls thicker than faith. But there are rumors that anyone who even hears the words from its pages becomes marked not with a curse, but with a memory of something they've never seen, a chapel they've never entered, a song they've never heard but cannot stop humming. Soft, subtle, always behind the silence, because the 6th diary was never just a record. It was a key, and once opened, it never truly closes. They say if you kneel at the altar of Briar Hill Chapel, what remains of it, and press your ear to the cold stone floor, you can still hear it, not footsteps, not whispers, but singing, soft, melodic, inhuman, a chorus without language, a harmony built from breath, teeth, and bone. They call it the choir below, but it is not a choir in the human sense. There are no robes, no hymnals, no congregation gathered in praise, only voices, dozens, hundreds, thousands, layered like earth, one atop another, buried deep beneath the chapel ruins, and if you listen long enough, you'll hear your name. The origin the choir is first mentioned in the 3rd diary of Father Elwood, but it's not described as literal singing. He refers to it as a great humming beneath the roots, a vibration that shook the chapel pews late at night. He claimed it started as a faint murmur, like wind through old pipes, but soon it grew. Visitors reported teeth chattering, glass vibrating in its frames, and one nun, Sister Callista, wrote, "It is not a song, it is a warning, a lullaby for something that does not sleep." Over time, the choir became a fixation for Elwood. He stopped performing regular mass, spent hours in the cellar, pressing his head against the stone, humming back as if trying to match its rhythm. In his final coherent entry before the madness took full hold, he writes, "They do not sing to be heard. They sing because it is the only thing that keeps it dreaming. Who or what is singing?" Scholars, occultists, and paranormal historians have spent years theorizing the nature of the choir below. Some believe it's the souls of the damned, those sacrificed beneath the chapel during early, hidden rituals dating back centuries before Elwood's time. Others think it's a manifestation, a psychic residue, that the sheer amount of suffering, confession, guilt, and secrecy compacted into that chapel over generations formed a kind of spiritual frequency, one that now vibrates through the stone itself. But there's a darker theory, one Elwood hinted at, but never confirmed. We are not above it, we are inside it. The chapel is not built atop the choir, the chapel is the throat. According to this idea, the Briar Hill Chapel was not constructed by accident or even by devotion, but designed as a vessel, a resonating chamber. Every hymn sung, every prayer whispered, every funeral eulogy, every confession, all of it fed the thing that sleeps below, and the choir, they are its lullaby, the last layer of silence between us and it. The choir in modern times, since the chapel's collapse, reports of the choir have not ceased. In fact, they've increased. Campers and thrill seekers who dare to venture near the site report a strange phenomenon, a low-frequency hum that makes their ears ache, their stomachs turn. Some claim to hear distinct voices, others only melodies that don't make sense. More disturbingly, many experience sleep paralysis after leaving the site, always accompanied by the same hallucination. A figure in black robes, standing beside their bed, mouth wide open, but not speaking. Singing, silently, their lips moving in time with a song that echoes inside the skull, not the ears. One survivor, a local photographer named Marnie Blake, described it like this: "It wasn't coming from the outside. It was like my bones were vibrating, like my blood had learned a language and was trying to remember how to speak it." What happens when it stops? Elwood's sixth diary ends with a cryptic phrase: "Should the choir fall silent, the throat will open, and what sleeps shall listen no more." Interpretations vary. Some believe this refers to an awakening, that the creature or presence beneath the chapel is being pacified by the constant vibration. The choir is not a blessing. It's a chain, and if it breaks, if the last note fades, there will be no warning, only hunger. A silence so absolute, it drowns the world. The last known recording in 1993, an amateur paranormal group placed a contact microphone on the chapel floor overnight. The recording, dubbed the Briar Tape, contains nearly 7 hours of ambient noise. For the first 5 hours, nothing but static, but then, at 5:13 a.m., the singing begins, soft, multilayered, not quite human. And then, unmistakably, a name is whispered, not a common name, not one of the researchers, the name of a viewer, someone who watched their YouTube upload of the tape 17 years later and heard their own name spoken on the video. The tape was removed, the group disbanded, one of them went missing a month later. Her final text to her sister read, "The choir stopped last night, it was beautiful, and now, it's so quiet." Conclusion: the choir below is not just a legend. It's a warning, a living signal, and as long as it sings, something stays asleep, but the cracks are forming, the hum grows faint, and if silence falls over Briar Hill once more, the throat will open. And the song will end with us. Some stories fade with time, some wounds scar over and disappear, but others stay open, bleeding beneath the surface of history, waiting for anyone to pick the scab. The final Mass at Briar Hill Chapel wasn't scheduled. No public notice, no parish bulletin, no choir, only one priest, one candle, and a book that should never have been opened. It was never meant for salvation. It was a summoning. The night it happened, October 30th, 1967. All Hallows Eve. The sky was a heavy velvet gray, bloated with a storm that never broke. Locals reported a pressure in the air, a thick, buzzing tension that made the birds vanish and the dogs howl through the night. At exactly 11 p.m., the chapel bell rang. It had been broken for years. No one pulled the rope. That was the beginning of what would later be called the final Mass. Inside, Father Elwood stood at the altar alone. His robes were tattered, soaked in something far darker than water. The sixth diary sat open beside a black chalice, etched with runes no living scholar has since translated. What was in that cup? Blood. Oil, something older, we don't know, but what we do know is this: he drank it, and then he began to speak. The Mass that wasn't what happened next was not a Mass in the Catholic sense. There was no Eucharist, no gospel, no congregation, only a voice. Elwood began chanting in a tongue not known to this world, not dead, not ancient, but alien. Something deep, guttural, yet melodic, like gravel grinding in perfect harmony. Witnesses, and yes, there were a few claimed they could hear the words through the walls, through their windows, in their sleep. We heard Latin, but not Latin. It was like the words were inside your skull. You couldn't cover your ears. You couldn't escape. Marjorie Klein, age 13, from her diary entry dated November 1st, 1967. As the chanting continued, a vibration began not in the air, but in the ground. The soil around the chapel shifted. Cracks formed in the foundation. The stained glass windows pulsed like lungs. And then the singing began again, the choir below. Only this time, they were screaming. The collapse at 11:59 p.m. The chapel exploded inward, not outward, no signs of outward force. No blast marks. It was as though something had sucked the air, stone, and memory into itself, like the chapel had been devoured from the inside out. By dawn, all that remained was a blackened crater where the altar had once stood, and a single, unburned object at the center, the chalice. Still full, still warm, the authorities found no trace of Elwood, not a bone, not a drop of blood, nothing. But for weeks after the incident, local residents reported dreams, identical dreams, of a chapel, twisted upside down, built into the sky, and a man with no face, wearing robes made of stitched hands, walking slowly down an endless aisle of kneeling shadows, and always, that song, low, endless, not a hymn but a summons. What did Father Elwood unleash? Some believe Elwood opened a gate not to hell, but to something older than hell, a place beneath places, a hunger beneath time. Others believe he became that which he feared most, that in trying to contain the evil festering in Briar Hill, he absorbed it. Let it rewrite him. There's a theory that he was never a man to begin with, that Elwood was a vessel, chosen long before birth, bred for one task, to sing the last note and break the seal. The final Mass wasn't a ceremony. It was a conclusion, the end of a ritual that had been echoing since the first stone was laid, a closing of the veil, or an opening, the aftermath since the final Mass. No plants grow on the chapel grounds. No birds fly overhead. Compasses spin. Machines fail. GPS maps blur the coordinates. And no one who's spent a full night on the grounds has returned unchanged. Those who stay hear the chanting. Those who leave here. Silence, too much silence. One woman said, "It's like I left part of my soul there, but worse, I think something followed me back." Paranormal investigators have gone missing. Occult groups have tried to reclaim the site, only to fall into disarray. One priest, sent by the diocese to bless the crater, vomited blood the moment his foot touched the soil. He died a week later. His final words, "The choir is in me now. The Mass never ended. It just moved." This is not a confession. Those are the first words of the final page found inside Father Elwood's seventh and last diary. The page was torn, stained with something dark, possibly ink, possibly blood, and found wedged behind a broken altar stone decades after the chapel collapsed. There was no date, no signature, just that first sentence, and what followed. This is not a confession. This is an admission of failure, of fear, of what I invited in. The final chapter of this story does not take place in the chapel, or in the cellar, or even in this world entirely. It takes place in the margins of faith, of reason, of sound. It takes place in what was left behind. The diary they shouldn't have opened, the seventh diary, was different. The handwriting no longer matched Elwood's earlier entries. The strokes were jagged, uneven, as if written in pain or frenzy. Entire pages were filled with looping, repeated phrases. "It sleeps, it dreams, it sings through me." Others had no text at all, just drawings. Circles within circles, eyes without pupils, an endless spiral of mouths, choir robes drawn with hollow chests where the hearts should be, and on one page a map, rough and unclear, but pointing not to the chapel itself, but beneath it, beneath even the cellar, to a place labeled simply the mouth. The final descent, according to scattered and controversial sources, including a 1974 Vatican memo leaked anonymously, a team of clergy was dispatched to the Briar Hollow ruins not for preservation, but containment. They were instructed to find the mouth and seal it permanently. Only one of them came back. He spoke only once about what he saw. It wasn't a door, it wasn't a tunnel, it was open, already open, and we were too late. The others 5 in total were never recovered. No bodies, no trace, but something did return, because weeks later a new diary appeared, bound in leather that did not match any known animal. Inside was one page, handwritten, in Elwood's script. "It is finished. I am the hymn now. I do not speak, I am spoken through. The choir below is no longer below. It has risen. It wears skin. Was Elwood ever human? That's the question that haunts this case. Was Father Elwood just a priest who went mad under the weight of spiritual darkness? A man broken by isolation and a crumbling faith? Or was he something else entirely, something older, hiding behind a collar, waiting for the right moment, the right note to strike? Scholars have pointed out that no official birth record for an Elias Elwood exists before 1911. No childhood photos, no seminary classmates who remembered him, no family, and yet he was there, preaching, writing, recording everything, until he didn't. The song lives on today. The diaries are locked deep in a restricted Vatican vault. But copies and digital scans have leaked. Every time they resurface online, strange things follow. Comment sections fill with gibberish that, when decoded, match patterns from the choir chants. People report hearing humming after reading even a few lines. A YouTube uploader who narrated all 7 diaries in a single video vanished 3 days later. His house was found empty except for a looped recording on his laptop. Just 4 words repeated over and over. "It hears me now." The warning: we missed the final entry, the true last words of Father Elwood. If it was even him, end not in fear, but in satisfaction. The Mass continues. The song is inside them now. The silence was never real, only the listening. Maybe the choir below isn't under the ground anymore. Maybe it's not even in the chapel. Maybe it's in us. In every whispered prayer, every half-remembered dream, every sudden chill when we're alone. In the silence between words. In the hum of electronics. In the background noise you thought was just nothing. It's singing right now. Listen, can you hear it?